Okay. Yeah, so we're gonna get started here. So for those of you who haven't met, my name is Mike Kriesberg. I'm the policy fellow here at Abundant Housing, Massachusetts. So thank you for joining this training session. Just to give like a high level overview of what the goals are today. Really it's to kind of run through some of the logistics of the day so that when you show up there, you have a kind of a better sense of what's going to happen. It might be a little bit chaotic, so we want to make sure people are prepared. And then the other two goals are to just go over what we're actually lobbying on, our policy priorities for this day, and then provide any tips or strategies as it relates to telling your own story during your meeting with legislators. And then the last thing I'll actually add is that we're also going to leave a decent amount of time at the end here to ask questions, because really we want to make sure that you feel supported and have the knowledge that you need to make this a good day. So I'm going to pull up the slideshow here, share my screen, and then we can get started. Okay, so as I mentioned here is the agenda for the day. We're going to start off just by going over the actual run of show, beginning from arrival through the legislator meetings. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the legislative context for the day and that we're operating in as we approach the end of session here, which is at the end of July. We're going to go over in a little bit of detail our two specific policy asks, the main issues that we're lobbying on this day. We're also going to cover a few messaging points as it relates to each of those asks. Then we're going to look at the actual meeting itself. We scheduled one meeting with one of your legislators. We're just going to go over what each of those meetings is going to look like roughly. After that, we'll give a couple prompts on sharing your story. Again, this day is a lot about you as constituents, as advocates, talking about your experience in housing advocacy, why you feel it's important. And so I want to just give a little bit of guidance there about, how to set that up, what to talk about, how long you'll have, so on and so forth. Then the last slide or last couple slides here will be actually preparing for lobby days. So again, some more logistical stuff, and then we'll wrap up with a question and answer section. So hoping that the actual presentation portion of this takes about 25 minutes-ish, and then we'll take questions at the end. We'll say that if you have questions throughout, please throw them in the chat just as a good place to like hold them, and then we'll tackle them all at the end. Okay. So for the run of show, we're asking people to begin arriving anywhere from 9:15 to 9:45. Again, the actual official program doesn't start until 10 o'clock, the rally and speaking program, but we ask that you show up early for a couple of reasons. One is that, there could be traffic, the train could break down, there's a whole manner of things that could, cause people to be late. So if you build in a little bit of cushion, that's super helpful. Another reason is that at the check-in, that's where we'll also be handing out t-shirts and other AHMA swag. So the earlier you get there, the better the chance that you can get a t-shirt that's your size. Right now, we're kind of guesstimating what people's sizes are going to be. So earlier show up, more likely you get a t-shirt that actually fits. And then also two other things, the AHMA staff will be hanging out there. Your fellow advocates will be hanging out there. So it'll just be a nice place to see some people, hang out. We'll have coffee, a nice place to chat. And then lastly, in addition to actually like lobbying on bills and talking policy, a huge part of this day is to have a show of force for the pro-housing movement. This is obviously our first lobby day. We really want to announce to the world a little bit about how large our movement has become, how many people are feeling compelled to come to the State House on a Wednesday morning. And the more people we have in the morning, the more people we have for the speaking program. It looks a lot better for the journalists that are going to be there, for the legislators that are going to be there, for the photographers that are going to be there. So we really strongly encourage you to show up before 10 a.m. Now, with that being said, the rally and speaking program will start promptly at 10 a.m. I say promptly because we have a pretty jam-packed speaker list here that we're really going to try to get through in 45 minutes. You're going to hear from our executive director, Jesse. You're going to hear from my colleague, Cassie. Then we have 4 AHMA members / advocates who are going to be speaking. We have one of our board members, Kathy Mercado, who runs the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership up in Lowell. We have Becca Schofield from A Better Cambridge, and also an affordable housing developer. We have Kobe Frangillo, who is a town councilor in Franklin. And then we have Raul Fernandez, who runs a social justice nonprofit. You might have met some of these people if you were at YIMBY Town this year. I think they're all at YIMBY Town, so hopefully there'll be some familiar faces. We'll hear from them. After that, we're also going to hear from Senator Brendan Creighton, who is the primary sponsor of our priority bill in the Senate. And then we're also going to wrap up the program hearing from the Lieutenant Governor and the Housing Secretary, Ed Augustus. So pretty jam-packed speaking program. We're really excited about the speakers that we got. We hope, hopefully it'll be really interesting. Hopefully it will, just generate like a lot of enthusiasm, because this is actually a really exciting time in the pro-housing space. There's really a lot of momentum here, and we're hoping that energy is captured during the speaking program. So once the speaking program ends at 10:45, this is going to be one of the trickier parts here. We're going to move from the State House to our main conference room, conference room 428. That's where we'll have our official check-in. That's where you'll get a packet with information about the YIMBY bill, about ADUs, about AHMA. That's the package you'll be giving to the legislators. So we've budgeted about 45 minutes for that, because all of us are going to need to go through the general hooker entrance, go through security, and then make our way up to the conference room on the 4th floor. I think so. We'll reach out with a little bit of information later around like meeting times, but the meetings are going to begin at 11:45, and most of them are between 11:45 and 12:30. Some of them are at 12:45, 1 o'clock. But we're hoping that 45 minutes is enough time to get from the State House steps through security up to the conference room. Once you're in the conference room, that's where you'll check in. That's where you'll find out where and when the meeting with your legislators are, and those are scheduled really kind of between this time period, 11:45 and 1:30. So you'll find out there what time your meeting is, when your meeting is, and then you will go to that meeting with the rest of your group. Something want to note here, obviously we all have 2 legislators. You have a senator and a representative. For this lobby day, we have just scheduled 1 meeting with either a representative or a senator, and we'll let you know as the day gets closer whether you're meeting with a representative or a senator. But we do encourage you also, after or before your meeting, depending on what time it is, to go and knock on the other legislator you have. Knock on their door, see if they're there, and see if you can meet with them, kind of like spur of the moment. While this is happening, we'll also be serving lunch. That's going to run roughly from 12 to 1 o'clock. It's not a formal lunch program because of the way that we've set it up here. Our meetings are running throughout this time period, so it's fairly casual. We'll be ordering in pizza. We'll have gluten-free options. We'll have vegan options, but lunch will be served throughout then. So whenever people are feeling hungry or want to have it, that's when lunch will be served. And then the last thing I should note about this room here, which isn't on the slide deck, and we're still putting it together, but we're also going to have a storytelling booth set up in the conference room, so we can capture people's stories. If people want to participate, that we might share it on social media later. A huge theme of this day really is trying to capture and present the stories of all of us, of AHMA, and of the pro-housing movements. That's going to be another opportunity to do so. So the next piece here I want to talk about is a little bit of legislative context. And are on the left and right side of the screen here. The big one, the Affordable Homes Act. It's the one you've probably heard most about in the news. It's a 5-year spending authorization plan. And so this bill, in addition to most of it has to do with capital spending, but there are also some policy items in it. The main one that we're going to focus on here that I've noted here is about legalizing ADUs. We'll talk about that more in depth on the next slide. but then a couple other policy items of note in it, not necessarily that we're lobbying on it, but just for your information. There's also included in this bill a provision that would lower the threshold for adopting inclusionary zoning. There's a provision in it to enable a local option real estate transfer fee, which, we might have heard a lot about. There's been a lot of chatter about that. So those are just some of the other policy items that are in it, but really what we're going to be focusing on is ADUs. And then just again, for everybody's reference here, right now it's currently sitting in Ways and Means. We're kind of waiting right now to see when the House will debate the bill on the floor. We thought initially that it might be this week. Doesn't look like it's going to be this week. It might be next week. It might be the week after. Unfortunately, we don't have a great idea of when the House is going to pick it up. But I mean, I think either way, whether the House has voted on this legislation or not, we're still going to be lobbying on it because it does need to go to the Senate and it does need to be hashed out in conference committee. Then the second piece of legislation that we're focusing on is an act to promote Yes in My Backyard. You might remember this from the summer. We had a couple letter writing campaigns about it. There was a hearing on the bill that some of you might have attended. As a reminder, this is a zoning reform measure, so no spending, just has to do with zoning reform. And a couple of the things that it does is establishes housing production goals, also legalizes accessory dwelling units statewide, but the language is a little bit different, and I can answer any questions about that later on, about the differences between the two. There's also, pretty similar language around adopting inclusionary zoning. Then there's a couple other provisions related to transit-oriented development and converting vacant commercial spaces to housing. And that bill is currently sitting in the Housing Committee. They were supposed to have reported it out already, but they've set a couple of extensions for that, along with a lot of other bills in the Housing Committee. So right now, that's where it is. It's just kind of sitting there. There are two policy asks. Again, one is related to each of the bills. I'll start with the first one here because this is really the most important one that we're focusing on, and that is supporting legalizing accessory dwelling units by right statewide this legislative session. And just, I've noted here a couple notes on terminology, right? By right means that if a homeowner proposes to build an ADU or anything really, and it meets the requirements set by state and local law, it can be built without needing any sort of zoning approval or special permit. It just makes building significantly easier because you don't need to go through extra process and red tape. And then also another note here is I know we're calling it statewide, but the way that Massachusetts' zoning is set up, statewide actually means everywhere except Boston. So if you're meeting with a Boston legislator, just note that it won't directly impact their district. But of course, the greater Boston area exists as like a housing ecosystem. So that, if the rest of the state does legalize this housing type, I think it could impact Boston, in some indirect ways. Yeah, so this is really the kind of the main policy ask that we're going for, is to ask legislators to support by right legalization of ADUs, through the Affordable Homes Act. That's probably the vehicle that it's going to be carried in. And then our second policy ask here is related to an act to promote Yes in My Backyard, and that is to issue a favorable report. So what that means is that bills, when they're before a committee, they receive three types of reports. One is ought to pass, one is ought not to pass, and the third is sent to study. First two are pretty self-explanatory, but the last one, sent to study, effectively means that the bill is not going to pass, or that the committee doesn't recommend that the bill is going to pass, so it just dies, in another committee. As I mentioned, right now, this bill is sitting in the Housing Committee, so they haven't issued a report on that. So we're asking legislators, if they're on the Housing Committee, to report it out favorably. And if they're not on the Housing Committee, we're asking them to ask their colleagues on the Housing Committee to report it out favorably. This also should note, this doesn't mean that bill is going to pass. If it gets reported out favorably, it goes to Ways and Means, and it might not make it out of that committee, but it's the next step in the process. So right now, we're just where we're at. We just hope that they issue a favorable report. If they do so and it still doesn't pass this session, then it, at least provides some good momentum for next session, where it says this bill already received a favorable report, and we can, just basically go through the process again. So a couple key messaging points related to each of these asks. Again, starting with the first one around ADUs. First one, I think we just kind of, again, want to center it a little bit on like, why we're doing this. And right, it's about homes. We're trying to create homes here. And so it's important to note that anybody can live in an ADU, obviously, but they're often lived in by seniors who either want to downsize or maybe want to live closer to their family. Young people who maybe are coming back from college and can't afford their own place in Boston or Cambridge, but still want to have like an independent living space, or maybe they just want to live in the neighborhood that they grew up in, but they grew up in a suburban single family neighborhood that has no housing options besides single family homes. And then the third population that we see a lot of people living in are individuals with disabilities. Again, so that you can have like your independent living space, but if you want to live closer to a caretaker or to a family member or a friend, it provides that flexibility. Another key point that we want to hit on here is that it's really essential that the state have minimum standards for ADUs. I've linked a report here, and when we send around the slide deck, you can check out the report. It's fantastic. It's from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. It was published just this last fall. You'll see abundant housing pop up a couple times, including you'll see Cassie and Jesse's name in the acknowledgments at the end. So we were, a little bit involved with that report, but basically it looks at other states who have passed statewide legalization bills and kind of compares what makes them successful and what makes them non-successful. And the base level requirement for success is that you need consistent minimum standards across the state. And so that's what this provision in the Affordable Homes Act would do. And that's why it's so essential that the state act on this, is because without these minimum standards across the board, then we actually don't see anything really get built. And then the last point, also related to this, kind of the flip end, is although there are minimum standards included in this bill, this does not mean that cities and towns do not have the ability to regulate ADUs. It specifically calls out in the legislation that they can be regulated according to their size and dimensions. And so there might be a lot of like, misperceptions or misconceptions about what this bill does, about totally taking away the rights of cities and towns to regulate ADUs. That is not true. Cities and towns have the ability to regulate them. They can, pass something more comprehensive or more restrictive, so long as it does not bump into those minimum standards set by the state. Okay, and then related to the YIMBY Act, kind of the main point that we want to hit on is that ADUs are great. We got to do it. It'll lead to more new homes being built, but that can't just be it. There really needs to be a comprehensive zoning reform strategy in the state. More needs to be done. The YIMBY Act isn't even the end of it. Even if we pass that, there would still be more to be done. But if ADUs are one piece of the puzzle here, then we also need to pass the YIMBY Act, or at least move it forward, because it gives us more tools to deal with the housing crisis or the housing shortage. Okay, so now for the actual meeting itself. So again, right, just to put us back into like where we are. So we've gone through we've had the rally, we've gotten to the conference room, we've checked in, you've found the time, the meeting space, you've met up with your group members, and now it's time for the actual meeting. So we at AHMA have already begun reaching out to some group leaders. And they're going to kind of be like the main facilitator of the meeting. Each meeting is going to have one group leader. So that group leader is going to introduce AHMA if the legislator isn't aware of us as an organization. They're going to go over the meeting agenda, which is you see right here. And then critically, they're going to be the first one to talk about our policy priorities and asks. So they're going to be the ones that first says, we really want you to support legalizing ADUs statewide through the Affordable Homes Act this session, and then also ask them to report the YIMBY bill out favorably. Once they've gone through that, that's when they're going to hand it off to the rest of the meeting members. And, kind of depending on how large the group is, some of these meetings are only 2 or 3 people. Some of these meetings are 10 to 12 people. Folks should have, 1 to 2 minutes to introduce themselves, tell their story. We'll go a little bit into more detail about what that means in the next slide. They can also feel free to reiterate any policy asks, but that's kind of your time to shine right there, those 1 to 2 minutes speaking with the legislator, speaking with their staff member. Finally, the meeting will end up after everybody's gone around and had a chance to speak. There'll be some time for questions. That's just going to be kind of open. Whoever feels comfortable answering questions will do so. And then at the end, thank them for the meeting and, head back to the conference room to report back. Okay, so I just talked about, sharing your story in that 1 to 2 minutes here. And so we don't want to, we're not going to prescribe exactly what you need to say. But what we've done here is provided some prompts to help you think about maybe a direction or like where you could take this. You know, we're going to be talking a lot about policy, and I've mentioned this before, but I think we want you really to focus on like your story, like what makes you get involved in this organization, what makes you come out to a lobby day. We talk all the time about how legislators and how elected officials only hear from people who don't support more housing. So talking about that, yes, I am a person in real life who supports more housing. We exist, and I'm your constituent. I'm a voting constituent. That's really critical to drive home. I don't think, of course, if you want to focus more on policy in your 1 to 2 minutes, like absolutely go for it. This is your time to say what you want to say. But these prompts here hopefully can provide some guidance when you're trying to craft your message about what you want to talk about. Okay, last kind of logistical points here. Again, we already talked about this, but please make a plan for arriving on time, anywhere from 9:15 to 9:30, maybe 9:45. Check the train schedules, check parking availability. I think it's probably a little bit easier to get in by train, but depending on how far out you are, you might find it easier to drive. Another thing, wear comfy shoes. For the speaking program, we're going to be standing outside, so you're going to be on your feet. And then there's going to be, a decent amount of moving around throughout the day in terms of getting up to the conference room, getting to your meeting, walking back, so on and so forth. So, wear comfy shoes. Did get a question about attire and how formal it needs to be. Like, wear whatever you want. We'll have, like I said, we'll have t-shirts if you want to wear that. I think some people are going to be coming from work or going to work, so they might be wearing their work clothes. But there's definitely no set attire. Another thing that would be great is just to research your legislators a little bit, find out what their policy priorities are, what committees they serve on. This is really critical, especially for the second ask, to know whether they're on the housing committee or they're not on the housing committee. And then also you just might find it interesting to see like what other legislation they're sponsoring. If you're not familiar, what are some of their other priorities hopefully in addition to our priorities. And again, when we send around the slide deck, you can just kind of click into this link here and enter in your legislator, and that'll give you all this information. And the last piece here, really can't emphasize this enough, practice saying your speech out loud. Things always sound different when you say them out loud versus when you write them. You might find that you have more time than you want. You might find out you have less time that you want, but it's really important that you do practice it. Also, not to make anybody more nervous, but like this is like, I don't know about you, when I public speak, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking. So if I've practiced saying it out loud, I can rely on my muscle memory a little bit because we're going to be looking at you, and you really want to be able to make your points distinctly, clearly, and hopefully persuasively. So really, again, just have practice saying your speech out loud. It'll be better for everybody. Okay, that is the last slide there as it relates to logistics. I'm going to pause here for any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen, but if you want me to pull back up a previous slide, we can do so. Okay, now I can look in the chat here to see if we have any questions, or if folks just want to raise their hands, then I can call on you. Going once, no questions.
Yeah, I have a question since I got to leave early. Will you share how large our groups are beforehand? Just to get a sense of like how much time we have for those introductions. and what our plates would be to like cater it a little better to the size of the group.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, I think we're gonna like that is our goal to send emails out beforehand with like putting everybody in a group to like this is like the group. That's what we're gonna like try to do. Really, think that would be important. If that doesn't happen for whatever reason, then I think on the morning of, like when you meet with your group, you'll be able to kind of like see or judge the size. But I mean, I think most of these meetings are scheduled from between 15 to 30 minutes. Most of these meetings, at least right now, are less than 5 people. I think there's really only a couple, like Newton, I think has like 10 or 11 people showing up. Brookline has like 7 or 8, but most of them are 5 or less. So I think you can bank on having, yeah, go Newton. I think you can bank on having, if you're not in one of those two places, a little bit more time.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then it looked like Kelly Brown had a question.
Yeah, hi. I was just trying to understand so you'll organize it so that is it actually our representative? Like I happen to be from Newton. There's a few of them. Would we only be going to my personal one, or how's that organized? Because people from Newton have different reps, for example.
Yeah. So for Newton right now, we've put most of the Newton people in a meeting with Senator Cynthia Cream. So that is all
Mhm.
together. Again, right, we were only scheduling one meeting per person, even though everyone
Right.
has 2 reps. So the Newton people we've grouped together, and that's kind of the thing. We have so many like representatives that just, it's so split up that it's hard to kind of reach critical mass for the representatives. So I think the majority of our meetings are on the Senate side. But for some of the more, populous House districts, then we've been able to schedule those meetings.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, I mean, I don't want to have us all standing, sitting in this room looking around awkwardly for more questions. So if there aren't any more questions, thank you for attending this training session. Thank you for signing up. Thank you, Cassie, for reminding me. If you have received an email from us and asking to be a group leader and you're on this call, if you please hang around for a second after the end of the meeting here, just so we can check in. But again, yeah, thank you for attending. Thank you for showing up. Really, really appreciate it. Oh, Jacinda, do you have a question?
In that space between the standards that are yet to be proposed and what's by right, are you going to give us a definition of what y'all are suggesting or we're all suggesting as those are formed, or how does that part of the conversation going to play out? I'm particularly interested in the owner occupied aspect of how it could be crafted.
Yeah, so I don't think our plan at this moment wasn't to get into like a lot of the weeds of like the different like specifications. I think if you feel comfortable, especially on the owner occupancy, if you feel comfortable personally to bring up some of those things, absolutely, please do, because owner occupancy, I don't want to belabor the point here. We're going to be fighting strongly to, make sure that those requirements aren't set in. And if you can talk to those in your 1 to 2 minutes about why that's, important to be addressed, please do so. I think unfortunately we're not going to provide like get into the weeds too much in some of the literature that we're handing out though.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you have an electronic version of the literature you're going to be handing out? Because then at least like we can view it if any of us want to dig more into the weeds depending on who we're meeting with, our state rep likes to dig into the weeds as a way of fending off advocates.
Yeah, absolutely. So, at the end of the week, we can send out the electronic versions of those. I think it's a great point about the rep. Also, it does remind me though, and a point that I wanted to hit on earlier here is that that's going to be a session day. So whether the actual legislator themselves will be able to join the meeting. I think we're hoping that they'll be able to join as many as possible, but I think that everybody should be prepared to meet with staff. And I don't say that like it's a bad thing, because the staff is really important. Coming from a former staffer himself, like, a lot of the information goes through the staff to the legislator, helps shape how they think about it, because they have a lot of issues to think about. But I just wanted to flag that right now, that, yeah, might get the legislator. We hope so, because that's just, a little bit more interesting and you really want to speak to the person, but be prepared to meet with staff. Okay. All right, so thank you again, everybody. Another reminder, if you are a group leader, ask that you stay, it's not required, you don't have to teach.
See you next week. Have a Hey Beth. Bye Beth.
Cassie, I can't hear you if you're talking.
Yeah, I think Michael's computer was having trouble, and Cassie was talking through Michael's earlier, so.
Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
we're in the same room, so hi. I'll just join him now. I
Yeah.
could have sat here this whole
Yeah,
time.
it might be to just like unblur the background so you don't get weird things there.
Hey Tom,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, we have Beth, Tom, Ian, and Jonathan, right? As group
It's like
leaders.
great, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you all so much for agreeing to do that.
Of course.
Happy to. Never actually talked to my state senator.
Do you
So
wanna-
excited to.
Hey Jonathan, sorry we missed that.
Sorry, are you guys, am I the only one who's freezing here, or is everyone else freezing too?
No, it's on Michael's end.
Okay.
Cassie, I think your computer had less issues just based on visuals, if you want to try from yours instead.
Oh, okay.
I feel so disappointed in my
Oh, boy.
computer. But yeah, I think
Oh,
John,
it's really blurry, yeah. Do you wanna
yeah, I can go.
transfer?
She's got a
There we-
MacBook Air, so that's what it is.
There we go.
Okay. Hi everyone. Jonathan was saying he was excited to meet with
Oh,
his-
no, I was just saying I never met my state senator, or never actually talked to them in person. So excited to see if she shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we didn't have like a full structured agenda for this. Really just wanted to see if any of you had questions specific to the meeting with legislators, your role as a facilitator. I think as Mike said, we want to get an email out to everyone that's in your group, sometime before Wednesday, basically designating you as the team leader. And on the day of, when we get into the conference room, we're hoping there's an easy way for folks to find each other. We'll have on the screen in the conference room a list of the meetings and folks who are signed up for the meetings for people's reference.
Yeah. I think at this point right now, like, to get people to group together, we're going to have like everybody just kind of meets outside of the office that they're going to. So they'll see, okay, at 12:15, we're meeting with Senator so-and-so in room, 410. So we're going to tell people, okay, show up to that room 5 minutes beforehand. And that's when, people can congregate and meet each other, if they don't do so already, organically in the room. But, I think that the room, especially in the early parts of check-in, is going to be a little bit chaotic. We thought that might be a way to just like sequester the groups. But yeah, I mean, I think also like if anybody has any questions about, some of the more like in the weeds policy stuff, this would be a good time to answer any of those questions.
I guess from your guys' end, are there any particular concerns that have been coming up in the legislative session about like the bond bill or the EMB bill in particular that we could maybe hone in on, that you feel like have been coming up a lot or have been particularly like persuasive in terms of making people slow to sign on to the bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the argument, at least as I understand it, as I hear it, it's around not like whether ADUs are good. Because people like ADUs, they, whatever. It's whether the state should, kind of take responsibility for it and set some minimum standards. So yes, it's good to talk about why they're they're affordable and they fit in and all that good stuff. But I think honing in on why the state needs to take action is kind of like critical.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially like if you come from a community like Lowell that turned down the most basic ADU ordinance last year. That could be a good sort of compelling argument to make that, like, I know for me, like, I'm moving to Lowell and I'll be meeting with my Lowell delegation, just pointing out that, like, the city didn't make the right choice and, like, could use a nudge from the state. I'm gonna try that and see how it goes.
Yeah. And I think just like generally though, like I think we're still pretty optimistic that ADUs will make it into the bond bill. Haven't heard any, someone here, has information that I don't, but I haven't heard anybody throwing cold water on it quite yet. So just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, Jonathan?
Aside from the specific bills, is there sort of like a broader message you'd like some of our legislators to kind of leave the day with? Like, this isn't like, just let them know, making sure they understand the brevity of the situation, understanding sort of like, hey, we're not done. Like, after we do 3A, after ADUs, like, I don't want you guys to think that this is all we need.
Yeah. I mean, I think absolutely hitting on that point, ending a meeting like we'll see you next year. Like, I think we're planning this to be an annual event for AHMA here. So, yeah, if you do the bond bill, if you do ADUs, you do all this stuff, like there's still going to be more to be done. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because I know there's been some sentiment around like MBTACA and some fear around touching like zoning reform in particular to a further extent. And I think like driving home the point that like even with MBTACA, like there's still so much more to do. It only touches a portion of the state too. So that might come up a little bit like with all the press that MBTACA has gotten, but I think we're painting like that positive picture and showing them that there is support because they often only hear from like the anti-housing constituents. So I'm excited to just to be there in our presence in these meetings. I think we'll make a big statement.
Okay. I don't know if there's any I guess like kind of questions between now and then. I mean, I think you've all been like reached out to either by Cassie or Julia or Joyce or Elvira. I don't know exactly where everybody lives, I think absolutely, send them an email, check in with them. I think we're here to really, like, you guys are so critical to making sure these meetings run well and, that the day runs well. So we want to make sure that you feel supported and that you, have all the knowledge and information that you need to do so. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay. Yeah, well, thanks again. Thanks for sticking around for a little bit extra time here.
Are you guys going to be able to send the slides out afterwards? I forget if someone asked that.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, we've had a few requests for that. And we'll send the recording to some folks that weren't able to make it. And then, yeah, we're going to endeavor to do the emails to every group. We have a long to-do list leading up to lobby day, but we should make it through. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited. Have a beautiful Memorial Day weekend and reach out with any further questions.
Cool. All right.
Y'all next week.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.